July 2nd, 1995. In a quiet bedroom in Pembroke Pines, Florida, Krissy Taylor, the angel of the runway who had just captivated the world with her ethereal grace, lay motionless as the first rays of summer sunlight filtered through her window, illuminating a body that had stopped breathing. The girl who had seemed to float rather than walk, whose otherworldly beauty had made photographers whisper that she was too pure for this world, had taken her final breath in the sanctuary of her childhood bedroom, where teddy bears still watched from shelves and ballet shoes hung forgotten in the closet. There had been no drugs, no scandal, no dramatic downward spiral that had claimed so many other young models. Just silence, and the devastating realization that sometimes the cruelest tragedies are the ones that arrive without warning. Her mother, Barbara, found her that morning, expecting to wake her daughter for another day of shoots and castings that had become routine in their household since Krissy had followed her older sister Nikki into the modeling world. Instead, she discovered a scene that would haunt her forever. Her youngest daughter, still wearing the oversized t-shirt she had gone to sleep in, looking peaceful but unnaturally still. The 911 call that followed would bring paramedics, police, and eventually the media circus that had pursued the Taylor family ever since Nikki had become one of the world's most recognizable supermodels. The official cause of death would later be determined as arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, a rare heart condition that had gone undiagnosed, a genetic time bomb that had been ticking silently in Krissy's chest throughout her brief but promising career. But in those first devastating hours, as word spread through the fashion industry and beyond, there was only shock and disbelief. How could someone so young, so healthy, so full of life and promise simply stop breathing? The timing felt especially cruel. Krissy was on the verge of breaking through to the same level of international success that had made her sister Nikki a household name. She had recently signed with top agencies, appeared on the covers of 17 and YM magazines, and was being courted by major fashion houses who saw in her the same magical combination of beauty and charisma that had made her sister famous. At 17, she should have been worried about prom dates and college applications, not heart conditions and mortality. The news of her death sent shockwaves through the modeling world and beyond. Here was a girl who represented everything pure and promising about American beauty. Blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, blue eyes that radiated innocence, and a smile that seemed to embody the optimism of youth itself. Unlike so many other tragic figures in fashion, Krissy's story had no dark chapters of addiction or eating disorders. She was the angel who had never fallen, the dream that had been cut short before it could turn into a nightmare. What if the real tragedy wasn't just her death, but the life she never got to live? What if being perfect wasn't enough to protect someone from fate's cruelest jokes? What if the brightest lights really do burn out the fastest, leaving us to wonder what might have been? But to understand the full magnitude of what was lost that July morning, we must first understand how it all began. In a family where beauty was both a blessing and a burden, where one sister's success had paved the way for another's dreams, and where the spotlight that promised to illuminate everything could also cast the darkest shadows. The year was 1978, and in Pembroke Pines, Florida, a baby girl took her first breath in a household that already understood the power and peril of extraordinary beauty. Krissy Taylor, who would later be known to the world as Krissy, was born into a family where her older sister Nikki was already showing signs of the stunning looks that would later make her one of the most successful models of her generation. From the very beginning, Krissy existed in the orbit of someone destined for greatness, and that proximity to stardom would shape every aspect of her short life. The Taylor household was one of contradictions and complexities. On one hand, there was the excitement and opportunity that came with Nikki's early success in modeling. The photo shoots, the travel, the money that began flowing in when she was still a teenager. On the other hand, there was the pressure and instability that came with building a family's financial future on the foundation of one daughter's looks and marketability. Barbara Taylor, their mother, had become not just a parent but a manager, constantly juggling the demands of nurturing her children while also protecting and promoting their careers. But from the very beginning, there was something different about Krissy that set her apart from her famous sister. Where Nikki possessed a bold, confident beauty that commanded attention, Krissy radiated a softer, more ethereal quality that seemed to come from some otherworldly place. Even as a toddler, she moved with an almost supernatural grace, as if she were floating rather than walking. Her platinum blonde hair caught sunbeams like captured starlight, and her wide blue eyes held a depth of innocence that seemed almost too pure for this world. The Taylor family's relationship with beauty and fame was complicated from the start. Nikki's success had brought financial security but also constant scrutiny, and Krissy grew up understanding that her appearance was not just a personal attribute, but a potential career path, a way to help support her family and achieve her own dreams. Yet unlike many children raised in the shadow of celebrity siblings, Krissy seemed to possess a natural humility and sweetness that remained untouched by the pressures around her. Could these early experiences of growing up in the reflected light of someone else's fame have planted the seeds for both her later success and her ultimate vulnerability? Even as a child, Krissy seemed to understand that she was being compared to her sister, that people looked at her not just as herself, but as Nikki Taylor's little sister. And while that opened doors, it also created expectations that were impossible to define or escape. Krissy's childhood interest revealed a soul that was far more complex than her angelic appearance might have suggested. While she was naturally drawn to fashion and beauty, how could she not be growing up in a household where these things were central to daily life? Her true passions lay in more artistic pursuits. She dreamed of becoming a ballerina, spending hours practicing pirouettes and pliés in her bedroom, imagining herself dancing on stages around the world. She loved to paint and draw, creating fantastical worlds filled with fairy tale characters that seemed to reflect her own ethereal nature. But there were also signs, even in those early years, of the fragility that would later prove so devastating. Krissy tired more easily than other children her age, sometimes complaining that her heart felt like it was racing after even minimal physical activity. Her family attributed these episodes to typical childhood growing pains or perhaps the stress of living in a high-pressure household, never imagining that her heart was struggling with a condition that would eventually claim her life. The dynamic between Krissy and Nikki during this period was both touching and complex. There was genuine love between the sisters, but also an inevitable element of competition and comparison that neither could entirely escape. Nikki, despite her success, was still a teenager herself, dealing with her own pressures and insecurities while also trying to be a supportive older sister. Krissy, meanwhile, admired Nikki's achievements but also struggled with feelings of inadequacy and the fear that she would never be able to live up to the standard her sister had set. As Krissy moved through her early teenage years, it became increasingly clear that she had inherited the same genetic lottery that had made Nikki famous. Her features were beginning to mature into the kind of classical beauty that photographers and casting directors dreamed of finding. She was tall for her age, with perfectly proportioned features and that intangible quality of presence that couldn't be taught or manufactured. Yet beneath the surface of this emerging perfection there was something fragile and vulnerable that friends and family noticed, but couldn't quite define. The modeling world began to take notice of Krissy when she was still in middle school. Photographers who worked with Nikki would comment on her little sister's potential, and casting directors began asking if she might be interested in trying some modeling herself. For a family that had already seen one daughter succeed in the industry, the decision to let Krissy begin modeling seemed natural, even inevitable. But perhaps most tellingly, even in those early years when success seemed to come easily, Krissy harbored doubts about whether she truly belonged in the world that had embraced her sister so completely. In letters she wrote but never sent, she revealed the depth of her uncertainty. "I don't know if I can be like Nikki, but maybe I can be me." It was a simple statement that captured something profound about the challenge of finding your own identity when you're constantly being measured against someone else's achievements. The transformation from Krissy Taylor, the shy middle schooler, to Krissy Taylor, the rising model, would happen with breathtaking speed. But it would also reveal the fault lines that had been present in her life from the very beginning. The tension between her public image and private self, the pressure to live up to impossible standards, and the physical vulnerability that none of them knew was there, ticking away like a time bomb in her chest. The mid-1990s arrived like a golden dawn for the Taylor family, bringing with it opportunities and recognition that exceeded even their most optimistic dreams. Nikki had already established herself as one of the world's premier supermodels, gracing covers from Vogue to Sports Illustrated and commanding fees that had transformed her from a Florida teenager into a global icon. Now it was Krissy's turn to step into the spotlight, and the fashion world was eager to see if lightning could strike twice in the same family. The first professional photo shoot was a revelation that surprised even those who had watched Krissy grow up. Where many teenage models required extensive coaching to understand how to work with cameras and lighting, Krissy seemed to possess an innate understanding of how to translate her ethereal beauty into compelling images. Photographers would later describe her as having a quality of floating. She moved through poses with such natural grace that she seemed to defy gravity, creating pictures that felt more like captured dreams than traditional fashion photography. The breakthrough moment came in 1994 when Krissy was cast for the cover of 17 magazine. The resulting image became iconic almost immediately, her blonde hair catching the light like a halo, her blue eyes radiating innocence, her smile embodying pure American youth. But it was the way the studio lights seemed to make her glow from within that made photographers whisper she was an angel of the runway. The magazine flew off newsstands, and suddenly Krissy Taylor had found her wings. Yet even as her star ascended, there were signs that this angel's flight might be more fragile than anyone realized. During those early shoots, when studio lights blazed hot and bright, Krissy would sometimes pause between takes, her hand pressed to her chest, catching her breath in a way that seemed unusual for someone so young. "Just tired," she would say with that ethereal smile, never knowing that her heart was already beginning its silent struggle against time. What made Krissy's early success so remarkable was how effortlessly she seemed to navigate the often treacherous waters of the modeling industry. Where other teenage models might be overwhelmed by the pressure and artificiality of fashion shoots, Krissy maintained an almost supernatural poise and professionalism. She arrived on time, took direction well, and brought to every shoot a quality of lightness and joy that made even veteran photographers smile. The work came in rapid succession after that first 17 cover. YM magazine featured her as their Girl of the Year. Teen fashion brands competed for her endorsement, and major agencies began courting her with contracts that would have set her up financially for life. By early 1995, at just 16 years old, Krissy was earning more money per month than most adults made in a year, and her face was becoming recognizable to teenagers across America. But behind the scenes, the pressure of sudden fame was taking its toll in ways that were largely invisible to the outside world. The fashion industry of the 1990s was a far more unforgiving place than it would later become, with little understanding of the psychological and physical challenges faced by teenage models. The pressure to maintain a perfect appearance was relentless. The travel schedule was exhausting, and the constant scrutiny created a level of stress that would have been difficult for anyone to handle. let alone a girl who was still trying to figure out who she was. More troubling were the physical symptoms that Krissy began experiencing as her career intensified. She complained increasingly of fatigue, telling friends and family that she felt tired all the time. Like my heart can't keep up. She would sometimes become short of breath during photo shoots, particularly those that required physical activity or extended periods under hot studio lights. Her family attributed these episodes to the normal exhaustion that came with a demanding career, never imagining that her symptoms were signs of a serious underlying condition. The relationship between Krissy and Nikki during this period was both a source of support and additional pressure. On one hand, having a sister who understood the unique challenges of the modeling world was invaluable. Nikki could offer practical advice about everything from dealing with difficult photographers to managing the financial aspects of a modeling career. On the other hand, the constant comparisons between the sisters created a dynamic that was psychologically challenging for both of them. Krissy struggled with feelings of inadequacy despite her obvious success. In her mind, she was always being measured against Nikki's achievements, and while she was proud of her sister's success, she also felt the weight of expectations that came with being the next Taylor sister. Friends noticed that she would sometimes seem sad or withdrawn despite having just completed a successful shoot, as if success itself wasn't enough to fill some deeper need for acceptance and identity. Was the success they achieved truly worth all the pain they endured? For Krissy, the question was becoming increasingly relevant as she navigated the complex emotions that came with teenage fame. She had achieved in months what many models spent years trying to accomplish, but the cost was becoming apparent in her increasing exhaustion, her struggles with self-doubt, and her growing sense that she was losing touch with the simple pleasures of being a regular teenager. The modeling industry's treatment of young talent was particularly problematic during this era. There were few protections in place for teenage models, little understanding of the unique pressures they faced, and an attitude that treated them more like products than people. Krissy was expected to maintain the image of the perfect American teenager, while also meeting the professional demands of a multi-million-dollar industry, a balancing act that would have been challenging for someone twice her age. Yet despite these pressures, Krissy maintained the essential sweetness and authenticity that had made her famous in the first place. She was known on sets for her kindness to everyone from photographers to assistants, her professionalism despite her young age, and her ability to bring a sense of joy and lightness to even the most demanding shoots. Those who worked with her consistently described her as having an almost otherworldly quality, as if she were too pure for this world. As 1995 progressed, Krissy's career was reaching new heights. Major fashion houses were beginning to court her for campaigns, international magazines were requesting shoots, and her agency was fielding offers that would have established her as one of the highest-paid teenage models in the world. She seemed poised to follow in her sister's footsteps and perhaps even surpass her achievements. But beneath the surface of this ascending success, warning signs were accumulating that no one fully understood. The fatigue was becoming more pronounced, the episodes of breathlessness more frequent, and her complaints about her heart racing more concerning. In what would later be recognized as tragic foreshadowing, she confided to a close friend just weeks before her death. "I feel tired all the time, like my heart can't keep up." It was a statement that would haunt those who heard it, a warning sign that went unrecognized until it was too late. The spring of 1995 should have been a time of triumph and anticipation for Krissy Taylor. At just 16, she had achieved more in the modeling world than most people could dream of in a lifetime. Magazine covers, major campaigns, and international recognition had transformed her from a Florida teenager into one of the fashion industry's most promising new faces. Yet beneath the surface of this glittering success, cracks were beginning to show. Subtle signs that something was fundamentally wrong with the girl who seemed to have everything. The physical symptoms that had been manageable during her early modeling days were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Photo shoots that should have been routine were leaving her exhausted for days afterward. The bright studio lights that had once made her glow now seemed to drain her energy, and she began complaining more frequently about feeling dizzy or short of breath. Her family and management team attributed these episodes to the normal pressures of a demanding career, never imagining that her body was struggling with a condition that threatened her life. More concerning were the emotional changes that friends and family began to notice. The girl who had always been known for her sweetness and optimism was becoming increasingly withdrawn and moody. She would sometimes stare off into space during conversations, as if she were seeing something that others couldn't perceive. When asked about these moments, she would simply say that she felt different lately, as if something inside her was changing in ways she couldn't understand or explain. The pressure of living up to her sister's success was also taking its toll in ways that were largely invisible to the outside world. While Nikki continued to achieve new heights of international fame, Krissy found herself constantly measured against these achievements, creating a psychological burden that was almost impossible to bear. In private moments, she confided to friends that she sometimes felt like she was living someone else's life, that the success and recognition felt hollow and disconnected from who she really was. The modeling industry's demands were becoming increasingly incompatible with her declining physical condition. Long days on set, frequent travel, and the constant pressure to look perfect were exhausting her in ways that went far beyond normal teenage fatigue. She began turning down some assignments, claiming she needed time to rest, but her agency and family worried that taking breaks would hurt her momentum in a notoriously fickle industry. During this period, Krissy began writing more frequently in journals and letters that she never intended to send. These writings revealed a depth of introspection and vulnerability that few people in her life were aware of. She wrote about feeling like she was floating through her life without really experiencing it, about the strange sensation of being famous for something as arbitrary as her appearance, and about her growing sense that she was fundamentally different from other people her age. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not really here," she wrote in one particularly revealing entry. "Like I'm watching my life happen to someone else, someone who looks like me but isn't really me. I wonder if this is what it feels like to be a ghost, to be seen by everyone but not really known by anyone." It was a haunting observation that would later take on tragic significance, as if she had somehow sensed what was coming. The relationship between Krissy and her family during this period was complicated by the success that had brought them so much opportunity, but also so much pressure. Barbara Taylor was juggling the demands of managing two daughters' careers while also trying to provide some semblance of normal family life. The financial benefits of the girl's success were undeniable, but the cost in terms of privacy, normalcy, and family relationships was becoming increasingly apparent. Krissy's relationship with Nikki was particularly complex during this time. While there was genuine love and support between the sisters, there was also an underlying tension that came from being constantly compared to each other. Krissy admired her sister's achievements but also felt overwhelmed by the expectation that she would match or exceed them. Nikki, meanwhile, was dealing with her own pressures while also trying to be supportive of her younger sister's career. Did this tragic event mark their downfall? Or was it simply the tipping point of deeper problems? For Krissy, the increasing physical symptoms and emotional struggles of early 1995 represented the collision of multiple forces that she was too young and inexperienced to understand or manage. The demands of her career, the pressure of family expectations, and the undiagnosed heart condition that was slowly weakening her were creating a perfect storm that would soon claim her life. The most tragic aspect of this period was how preventable her death might have been if anyone had recognized the warning signs for what they really were. The fatigue, the shortness of breath, the complaints about her heart racing. All of these were classic symptoms of the cardiac condition that was slowly destroying her heart muscle. But in an industry where physical complaints were often dismissed as drama or weakness, and in a family focused on maintaining career momentum, these signs went unrecognized until it was too late. The final months of Krissy's life were characterized by a growing sense that something fundamental was changing, both in her physical condition and in her emotional state. Friends noticed that she seemed to be saying goodbye in small ways, being more affectionate with people she cared about, expressing gratitude for experiences that she had previously taken for granted, and sometimes talking about life in ways that suggested she understood how fragile it really was. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? For Krissy, the question was becoming whether she could find a way to reconcile the public image that had made her famous with the private struggles that were consuming her. She was caught between the demands of an industry that saw her as a commodity and her own need to understand who she was beyond her appearance and achievements. The irony was heartbreaking. Here was a girl who represented everything pure and promising about youth and beauty, but who was slowly being destroyed by forces that were largely beyond her control. The very qualities that had made her successful, her ethereal beauty, her otherworldly presence, her apparent perfection, were masking a vulnerability that no one fully understood until it was too late. The early summer of 1995 should have been a time of excitement and possibility for 17-year-old Krissy Taylor. School was ending. Her modeling career was reaching new heights, and she had recently signed contracts that would have secured her financial future for years to come. The girl who had been dubbed the Angel of the Runway by fashion journalists was poised to step fully into the spotlight that had long illuminated her famous sister, ready to claim her own place in the constellation of American beauty icons. But beneath the surface of this promising exterior, Krissy was struggling with changes in her body and spirit that she couldn't understand or explain to the people around her. The heart condition that had been silently weakening her throughout her brief career was beginning to accelerate its deadly work, creating symptoms that were becoming harder to dismiss or ignore. The fatigue that had once seemed manageable was now overwhelming, leaving her exhausted after even simple activities that should have been easy for someone her age. During what would prove to be her final photo shoots, something extraordinary happened. Just 3 days before her death, Krissy completed a campaign for a national teen magazine. The studio was alive with energy. Assistants rushing with clothes, makeup artists perfecting her already flawless features, photographers shouting directions over the music. Under the blazing lights, Krissy transformed into pure magic, her blonde hair seeming to catch fire, her movements so graceful she appeared to be dancing with light itself. "She's not walking, she's floating," the photographer whispered to his assistant as Krissy glided across the set. It was true. There was something otherworldly about the way she moved, as if gravity couldn't quite hold her down. But 3 days later, in the pre-dawn quiet of July 2nd, Barbara Taylor would discover a different kind of silence. No cameras clicking, no music playing, no voices calling out directions. Just a mother's footsteps on carpet, a hand reaching out to wake her daughter, and the terrible realization that the Angel of the Runway had finally taken flight. The contrast was devastating. From the blazing lights of stardom to the gentle morning sunlight filtering through a teenage girl's bedroom window, where teddy bears stood silent witness to a dream that would never wake up. The pressure to maintain her career momentum was intensifying just as her physical condition was deteriorating. Major fashion houses were courting her for fall campaigns. International magazines were requesting exclusive shoots. and her agency was fielding offers that would have made her one of the highest-paid teenage models in the world. But Krissy was increasingly struggling to meet these demands, often needing longer breaks between takes and requiring assistance with tasks that had previously been effortless. Her family and management team were aware that something was wrong, but the fashion industry's culture of perfectionism and the assumption that physical complaints were often psychological rather than medical led them to underestimate the severity of her condition. When Krissy complained of chest pain or shortness of breath, these symptoms were attributed to stress, anxiety, or the normal growing pains of adolescence rather than the life-threatening cardiac condition that was actually causing them. The emotional toll of her declining health was compounded by the psychological pressures of fame and family expectations. Krissy found herself caught between the image of perfection that the world expected from her and the reality of feeling increasingly weak and vulnerable. She began to withdraw from social activities, spending more time alone in her room, writing in journals that revealed the depth of her inner struggle. "I feel like I'm disappearing," she wrote in one of her final journal entries. "Not all at once, but piece by piece, like I'm fading away and no one can see it happening. Sometimes I wonder if this is what it feels like to become an angel, to slowly let go of everything that keeps you tied to the earth." The words were hauntingly prophetic. In trying to understand her exhaustion and the strange lightness she felt, Krissy had unknowingly described her own transformation, from the golden girl of American fashion to something more ethereal, more fragile, more destined for flight than earthbound fame. The relationship between Krissy and her family during this period was both a source of comfort and additional stress. Her mother, Barbara, was increasingly concerned about her daughter's health, but was also managing the demands of a career that required constant availability and perfection. Nikki, despite her own busy schedule, tried to be supportive but was also dealing with the pressure of maintaining her own success while watching her sister struggle. The final weeks of Krissy's life were marked by a series of small moments that would later take on enormous significance. She spent more time than usual with family members, expressing gratitude for experiences and relationships that she had previously taken for granted. She completed several photo shoots with a level of grace and professionalism that impressed everyone involved, but she also began turning down some assignments, claiming she needed time to rest. On the evening of July 1st, 1995, Krissy seemed unusually tired but otherwise normal to her family. She had spent the day relaxing at home, reading fashion magazines and working on some sketches that revealed her artistic talents beyond modeling. She went to bed early, telling her mother that she felt like she needed extra sleep to prepare for a busy week of shoots that were scheduled to begin the following Monday. Were these final decisions acts of surrender or courageous acts of self-preservation? Looking back, it's impossible to know whether Krissy sensed that her time was running out or whether she was simply responding to the fatigue that had been plaguing her for months. What is clear is that she faced her final hours with the same grace and quiet strength that had characterized her entire brief life. The heart condition that killed Krissy, arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, was a rare genetic disorder that affects the heart muscle and can cause sudden death in young, otherwise healthy individuals. It's a condition that often goes undiagnosed because its symptoms can be subtle and are easily attributed to other causes. In Krissy's case, the demands of her modeling career and the culture of the fashion industry likely prevented anyone from recognizing the true significance of her complaints about fatigue and heart palpitations. As she settled into sleep on that warm July evening, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her childhood bedroom, Krissy Taylor couldn't have known that she was about to become part of a tragic pattern that claims the lives of thousands of young people each year. Victims of undiagnosed cardiac conditions that strike without warning, stealing away lives that seem destined for greatness. The silence that fell over the Taylor household in the early hours of July 2nd would soon be broken by a mother's scream. paramedic sirens, and the devastating realization that sometimes the most beautiful angels are called home far too soon. The girl who had seemed to float through life had finally taken flight, leaving behind a legacy of beauty, grace, and heartbreak that would echo through the fashion world for generations to come. July 2nd, 1995. The morning sun that filtered through the windows of the Taylor family home in Pembroke Pines, Florida, illuminated a scene that would shatter not just one family but an entire industry that had invested its dreams in the promise of a 17-year-old girl. Barbara Taylor's discovery of her daughter's lifeless body was the beginning of a nightmare that no parent should ever have to endure, and the end of a dream that had seemed destined for greatness. The 911 call came at 7:43 a.m. Barbara's voice barely coherent as she tried to explain to the dispatcher that her daughter wasn't breathing, that the girl who had been the picture of health and beauty just hours before was now cold and still. The paramedics who responded found Krissy lying peacefully in her bed, looking as if she were simply sleeping, her blonde hair spread across the pillow like a halo. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of trauma or foul play, just the inexplicable absence of life from a body that had seemed perfect in every way. The news of Krissy Taylor's death spread through the fashion world with the speed and devastation of a wildfire. By afternoon, every major modeling agency, fashion magazine, and industry publication was scrambling to understand how someone so young, so healthy, and so full of promise could simply stop breathing. The initial reports were filled with speculation and confusion in an industry where eating disorders, drug abuse, and mental health issues were sadly common. Many assumed that Krissy had fallen victim to one of these familiar demons. But as the hours passed and more details emerged, it became clear that this tragedy was different from the usual cautionary tales that plagued the modeling world. There were no drugs in Krissy's system, no signs of an eating disorder, no evidence of the self-destructive behaviors that had claimed so many other young models. She had simply gone to sleep and never woken up, the victim of a heart condition that no one had known existed. The autopsy results, released several weeks later, revealed the truth that would both devastate and educate those who had loved her. Arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, a rare genetic condition that affects the heart muscle and can cause sudden cardiac death in young, apparently healthy individuals. It was a condition that often went undiagnosed because its symptoms were subtle and easily attributed to other causes. Exactly what had happened in Krissy's case. Within hours of the news breaking, tributes began pouring in from across the fashion industry and beyond. Photographers who had worked with her remembered her professionalism and natural ability, describing how she could transform any shoot with her ethereal presence. Magazine editors spoke of her kindness and humility, qualities that had made her a pleasure to work with despite her young age. Fashion designers who had been courting her for major campaigns expressed their shock and sadness at the loss of someone they had seen as the future of American modeling. Nikki Taylor's response to her sister's death was perhaps the most heart-wrenching tribute of all. In a statement released through her publicist, she spoke of Krissy not as a rising star or a professional rival, but as the little sister she had loved and protected throughout their lives. She was too pure for this world, Nikki said, her words capturing something essential about Krissy's character that had touched everyone who knew her. She had this light about her, like she wasn't walking but floating. Now I know why. She was already becoming an angel. The fashion industry's response to Krissy's death was complicated by guilt and soul-searching that went far beyond the usual expressions of sympathy. Many began to question whether the demands and pressures of the modeling world had contributed to her death, whether the industry's culture of perfection and its tendency to dismiss physical complaints had prevented anyone from recognizing the severity of her condition. while her death was ultimately caused by a genetic condition that could have struck at any time. The fact that her symptoms had been attributed to stress and career pressure raised uncomfortable questions about how the industry treated its young talent. The medical community also took notice of Krissy's death, recognizing it as an opportunity to educate the public about the dangers of undiagnosed cardiac conditions in young people. Her case became part of medical literature and educational programs designed to help doctors, parents, and coaches recognize the warning signs of potentially fatal heart conditions in adolescents and young adults. The funeral was held at a small church in Pembroke Pines with only family and close friends in attendance. The service was a celebration of Krissy's life rather than a mourning of her death, with speakers remembering her sweetness, her humor, and her dreams that had extended far beyond modeling. Her high school classmates, many of whom had known her before she became famous, spoke of a girl who had remained fundamentally unchanged by her success, someone who still cared more about friendship and family than fame and fortune. Barbara Taylor's eulogy for her daughter was a masterpiece of love and grief, capturing both the magnitude of what had been lost and the gratitude for what had been shared. "Krissy was never supposed to be ours for very long," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "She was too beautiful, too perfect, too pure for this world. She was just on loan to us from heaven, and now she's gone home where she belongs." The burial took place at a quiet cemetery surrounded by the palm trees and warm breezes of South Florida, the landscape that had shaped Krissy's childhood and early career. As her casket was lowered into the ground, a gentle wind stirred the air, rustling the white roses scattered on her grave like angel wings taking flight. For those who believed in such things, it felt like Krissy's spirit was finally soaring free, the angel of the runway returning to the heavens she had always seemed to belong to. In the years since her death, the fashion world has struggled to understand how they lost someone so pure, so early, so suddenly. Krissy Taylor became a symbol of fragility disguised as strength, of hearts that can shine brilliantly even while breaking silently. Her legacy lives not in scandal or cautionary tales, but in the simple, devastating truth that even angels can be more fragile than they appear. The woman who had graced magazine covers with the face of innocence died as she had lived. Gracefully, quietly, and far too soon. Krissy Taylor, the angel of the runway, departed not through scandal but through a heart too delicate to bear the weight of ordinary light. Her 17 years burned bright as a shooting star, beautiful and brief, reminding us all that some souls are simply too pure for this world. And perhaps that's the question we should all ask ourselves. In a world that worships perfection and celebrates the brightest lights, how do we protect the fragile angels among us whose hearts may be breaking even as they soar? Krissy Taylor's story serves as both a celebration of ethereal beauty and a warning about its hidden vulnerability. The question is, will we learn to see the signs before another angel's heart gives out beneath the weight of our expectations?